According to the Jewish tradition, we are in the high holy days. According to the news, we are in the low unholy days. Both are true. Solve that paradox and you get a trip to the next yuga. But it's not the high holy days only because the Jewish calendar declares it, but because this is, in fact, the consummation of the cycle of time, in which we are offered the opportunity to recuperate all that we have lost over all the lifetimes of spiritual entropy that have caused us to fall to such a low level of consciousness that now our lives are filled with anxiety and emotional instability and stuckness in immature modes of relationality, etc., etc. I won't belabor that side of it, but this is the time that we are offered the grace of redemption if we are willing to step out of the comfort zone of nihilism and narcissistic jouissance that we've become accustomed to. And very few are frankly going to take that offer up and ask for the grace that will set us free. But still, it's on offer. So I'll start out with the phenomenal plane news of the week, at least in the limited number of websites that I've checked to see what that news or disinformation or whatever it might be is being disseminated. And it seems that the titular head of the U.S. War Department has called for a meeting of every general in every branch of the U.S. military. That's never happened before, apparently. And the commentators that I've seen are arguing about, what's that all about? What's it for? But I haven't heard or read of any of them taking up what to me seems to be the most obvious point, which is that of late, also in the news, we have had reports that the U.S. Navy has been destroying civilian boats in the international waters off the coast of Venezuela and killing all the passengers without even knowing who they are or checking whether they're actually doing anything that deserves criminal indictment, let alone execution immediately. And without any evidence, they have been proceeding to this, what most international lawyers would consider a war crime, and that the U.S. military code itself considers to be illegal orders. And if you are given an illegal order, which is to kill people, that you have no evidence that they're doing anything wrong and they're not shooting at you, and these boats were minding their own business from the reports that they themselves, the government itself has given, well, that's an illegal order. And not that that doesn't happen all the time, but usually they cover it up. You find out a few years later, that happened. But here they're actually boasting about it. So what that seems to indicate is they are inducting the military to accept performing illegal orders without complaint. These are relatively minor illegal orders. But what if the military were, and starting with the generals, were soon to receive an order to attack countries that have not provoked such an attack with nuclear-armed missiles and bombs that will destroy whole civilizations and ultimately the world without any actual casus belli, without any justification? that would be an illegal order. So I imagine that the head of the War Department wants to make sure that his generals are on board to carry out that order when it's given to launch. Because otherwise, what's really the point of looking at them in the eye, having them actually in the room with you? You have to find out, are they loyal to whatever orders will be given? Or will they have some moral compunction that might interrupt the flow of the surprise attack that one assumes would be what would be discussed? And so I would imagine that the whole military, the chain of command down to the ones who are in the underground silos, etc., need to be, let's say, vetted, to be willing and ready to do what they are called upon to do. That's at least my take on it. It may be completely off base, but it does seem that the fact that this is being publicized, which in itself makes no sense, since, you know, if you have the whole military heads in one room, what a tempting target that would be for an enemy, right? So the situation in itself, the fact that it is being delivered, is a message to everyone to be prepared for such events to unfold. So it's within that context, then, of imminent apocalyptic culmination that we are here reading the Bhagavad Gita, which is describing a war in a mythical sense, but that could symbolize the same situation that we are all in. But of course, the real situation we're in is not about the external war. From a spiritual perspective, the war out there is irrelevant. It's the war in here, the war that everyone is fighting within their own ego and between the ego and the soul. That's the key to our liberation from the nightmare that history has become and that our own lives have become, if we're still in ego consciousness. And so this last week or so, I've been brooding over the Bhagavad Gita. For one thing, this translation that I recommended, as I've been reading it again, this time much more deeply and seriously because of the need to try to explain it and checking with the Sanskrit, it's wrong. It's an inaccurate choice of possibilities from the Sanskrit the spectrum of signifieds that each signifier has, and unless the translator is actually in the state of consciousness of Krishna or of the author of the Gita, these words cannot be understood, let alone translated, by people living in an entirely different cultural frame of reference. And so I've been finding not only is this translation not satisfying, but I haven't found one that is. Not that I've read all of them, but all of the ones I have access to. But there are outright mistakes in this one for anyone who is reading this. For example, in chapter 3, verse 16, just so in case you're reading it, you are confused about it, what is probably only a typographical error. Other errors are more in terms of meaning, but this does change the meaning. They leave out the word not, and it says here, he who does here on earth turn the wheel thus set in motion lives maliciously, etc. No, it's he who does not turn the wheel thus set in motion, because what is the wheel? the wheel is the wheel of sustenance through the living in accord with Dharma, in attunement with God, and being willing to sacrifice in the service of God, even if that means entering war. So it creates the opposite meaning. But there are many more, but I'm not going to go into them all. The point that I want to make is that the Bhagavad Gita is an extremely important text for the West. I actually think it's a foundational text for Western civilization, because it was known already by Plato, who even had some lines in the dialogues that were from the Upanishads and I think even from the Gita itself. So there was communication between East and West, and we could multiply the threads of how that traveled, including the Greek adoption of what they called Pyrrhonism, which was a kind of Buddhistic religion that became popular in the Roman Empire, et cetera, et cetera. But the real effect in the modern period of the Gita began when Johann Gottfried Herder translated parts of the Gita into German in 1792. And then his student, Friedrich Meyer, completed the translation of the whole Gita in 1802. And Meyer was an associate of Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer obviously read the Gita and was inspired by it, and it was after that that he wrote his books, including his magnum opus, The World as Will and Idea. And most of the ideas in that book were actually drawn from his interpretation, or I would say misinterpretation, of the Bhagavad Gita. By the way, the world and will as will and idea is now usually translated as will and representation, but I actually think even that's flawed. There's a difference between an idea and a representation, because a real idea is that which cannot be represented symbolically, but the words can only point to that, but they cannot actually represent the real. So even our ability to understand the nuances of what even someone in 1818, which is when that book was published, was writing, are already no longer accurately transmitted. So Schopenhauer, I think, was completely enamored of Indian philosophy, and it shows up all over his work. But again, it was his way of reading it, which was also affected by other translations that came later, including those of Max Müller, who wrote a whole series of books and eventually translated the Vedas in their entirety into German in the mid-1800s. And then you have Nietzsche coming in 1880 and writing many books, but one of them clearly from the Gita, Beyond Good and Evil, right? Isn't that what we were just pointing out in our last satsang, that Krishna was telling Arjuna he had to be in a state that's beyond good and evil. Well, Nietzsche picked that up, but I don't think his understanding of what it means to be beyond good and evil is the same as Krishna's by any means. And of course, he argued with Schopenhauer and misinterpreted Schopenhauer as implying that the will that he's talking about is just the will to life. And of course, he had to change that in his mimetic rivalry and say, no, it's the will to power. Well, but any will is, first of all, a love. will is a will to love, and then what you love, if you love power, then it will be a will to power. If you love beauty, it will be a will to beauty, right? But can't be limited to any of those objects. Will is free by definition, especially when it's the will of God that's being spoken of, which is the only true will, right? And so even for Nietzsche, wasn't his interest not so much power but truth? He wanted, if you want to say truth is having the power over ignorance or falsity, okay, but it's not the kind of power he was discussing of conquest and domination, etc. Although he did get into the fact that great humans at higher levels, like the Übermensch, would want spiritual power, not military or political or other kinds of power. But what is spiritual, and what does it mean to be the Übermensch? Isn't Krishna the ultimate example of the Übermensch? That he's really trying to bring into let's say, possibility again, or even into actuality. But because he identifies himself more with Dionysus than with Krishna, and they are not quite the same, I think he loses touch with that. And I think both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and another one who read, I think, the Gita at that same time as Schopenhauer was Hegel, and he actually, I think, developed the idea further that all of history is the absolute spirit unfolding in freedom to the ultimate state in which that state of liberation is the human destiny, and it becomes fulfilled at the end of time, which I think he probably thought Arjuna was Napoleon at the time, and he was his Krishna, but that I don't think worked out too well. But in any case, there was the modern Western thought has been anchored in the Gita. I think that's an important understanding, particularly because it continued. Deleuze, took off from Nietzsche, and Nietzsche's other idea that he developed even further was that of the eternal return, which is what Krishna was talking about in the Gita when he described the yugas, the cycle of time, which became very popular in Germany, including the diagram of the cycle of time, which we call the swastika. But I think that, perhaps Hitler was also inspired by the Gita, but I don't think he quite understood what Krishna meant by being an Aryan. So again, we have these complete misinterpretations and degradations of very subtle and rarefied ideas that are given us from the infinite intelligence of God as an act of grace. So in any case, I was brooding over all of this, and it came to me that the Bhagavad Gita, as the text that we have translated into all the different languages that it is now in, it no longer works. I don't perceive that people who read the Bhagavad Gita are transformed by that reading. I don't think it actually touches them. A few phrases, perhaps, and some appreciation for the high level of asceticism that seems to be required, and the almost impossible purity of heart, etc. So I think people think this is a book that's not really for them or for us in the modern age, and in a way, it's not. Except that at the very end of time, as things get really tough and the signs and wonders also begin to appear more, let's say, potently and cataclysmically, as well as miraculously. I think in that state that we are now approaching rapidly, we are going to need a Bhagavad Gita that we can actually relate to, that will take us to the same place that the original Gita was meant to take us, but which doesn't do the job any longer.